Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This will be the 11th in our series of sessions on upgrading from Primo to Primo V. In today's session, we'll cover from end to end the final step of your GoV process, which is, of course, going live with Primo V. We will start by talking a bit about selecting and requesting a date for going live with Primo V once you're confident with the outcome of your GoVE process. I'll present a review of the different types of domains for Classic Primo and Primo V so that you can identify the setup you have and you'll know exactly what's going to happen during your specific switch over to Primo V. We will go over, and I'll also demonstrate, the main preparation you'll be responsible for during the days before the switch. This is the Deeplink redirection. I'll provide a detailed description of the DNS switch, which is the action from which point onward end users accessing your current Primo will automatically be directed to Primo V. At this point, you will be live with Primo V. We'll discuss the remaining tasks that are to be addressed once the DNS switch has been executed. We'll end up with a sort of checklist in which it's clear that what the rollout and deployment team at Libris will be responsible for, and what you will be responsible for, which items on the list are or are not relevant for your institution. You're welcome to submit questions related to this session in the Q&A box, and I will try to address them towards the end of the session. Finally, we will look at several questions that have been sent in ahead of time. Let's get started. I want to start by reminding you that the actual switch from Primo to Primo V is a seamless process with no downtime involved. At one moment, end users will be accessing your current Classic Primo, and the next moment, new or refreshed browsing sessions will be automatically redirected to Primo V. Primo VE uses the same new UI customization, and the look and feel are practically identical to Classic Primo. It would be very surprising to hear of an end user who has noticed they have been redirected to an entirely different platform. All the significant differences between Primo and Primo V impact the institutional Primo administrators who configure and maintain Primo settings and integrations with other software products such as Alma. We strongly believe that these differences have a very positive impact on Primo admins, and I imagine that you agree, considering you've gotten this far and have joined this session or are viewing the recording. This takes us to picking a date for the actual switchover to Primo V. You can go live with VE during an academic semester or during the semester break. You can pick a weekday, excluding Fridays, or a Sunday. Again, the main impact is on your Primo admins, not the patrons. As for the time of day, a DNS switch executed by our cloud team will probably have to take place during the working hours of UTC +2 time zone, which is UTC +3 during April through October. This is just something to be aware of in situations when the DNS switch is executed on our end, CNAME to CNAME. If the switch will be performed on your end, which we'll discuss soon, the time frame becomes a bit more flexible. I'd say between 5 a.m. and 8 p.m. UTC. In such cases, the time of the switch should be coordinated with us, as there are additional actions we will be responsible for on our end. We'll get to all this shortly. The first step is to review your GoVE progress tracking chart and verify that all rows are either completed or not relevant for your current setup of Primo. Next, there is a checklist we provided on the Go Live page in the GoVE documentation. This is just for you to be sure that you haven't overseen any of the basics. From my personal experience, I would say that the most important thing to double check is that Primo V authentication is correctly configured and working. If you will be accessing Primo VE with your own custom domain, verify that authentication has been set up for this domain and not the CNAME, which you've been working with during the GoV configuration process. Don't worry, in just a moment I'll make sure we're all aligned with this terminology. Once you know you're ready to get going, the next step is to identify what type or types of URL are currently being used to access your classic Primo views, and if necessary, to decide what type or types of URL you plan to use to access your Primo V. I'll start with the 3 URL types, and then we'll go over the different options. For classic Primo, there is the CNAME, which will start with a unique prefix .hosted.xlibrisgroup.com. There is the A record, which will start with a Primo environment prefix .hosted.xlibrisgroup.com. And there is a custom domain, which would be your own local institutional base URL, not hosted in an Xlibris data center. For Primo VE, there is the CNAME, which will start with a unique prefix .primo.xlibrisgroup.com. Notice that slight difference. And there is a custom domain, which will look exactly the same as it did when used for Classic Primo, except for the continuation of the URL, which will change from Primo-Explore to Discovery. We'll see an example of that in one of the next slides. Technically, there is an A record, which will start with an Alma environment prefix .primo.xlibrisgroup.com or an Alma environment prefix .alma.xlibrisgroup.com. I say technically because for Primo VE, you should use either your CNAME or a custom domain and not the A record. Now, let's go over the 3 main options. First, which is the most common, you are using a CNAME for Classic Primo and plan on using a CNAME for Primo VE. The second possibility, you're using a custom domain for Classic Primo and wish to continue using it for Primo VE. A third scenario would be that you're using an A record and will be using a CNAME for Primo VE. If you're using an A record or a CNAME for Classic Primo and would like to start using a custom domain for Primo VE, or if you're using a custom domain for Classic Primo and would like to use only a CNAME for Primo for VE, that's also fine. So here's a rule of thumb. A domain used for Classic Primo can be configured to redirect traffic to Primo VE only if it is unique, meaning it's not used by any other Primo institutions that you do not share an Alma institution with. CNAMEs are unique and can be redirected. A records cannot be redirected to your Primo VE CNAME, as it is likely being used by other institutions on your Classic Primo environment. The same goes for a dedicated direct consortial domain being used by other members of the dedicated environment, which have their own separate Alma institutions. We'll talk a bit more about A records in a moment. Another point, which I'm assuming is obvious, is that Xlibris hosted domains, such as CNAMEs, are managed on our end, while custom domains are managed by the owner or administrator of the domain, which is on your end. Once you have decided upon a date and which type or types of URL you intend to use for Primo VE, please submit a Salesforce case to Primo support. We are requesting that the case be submitted at least 3 weeks prior to the requested go-live date to leave time for preparations on our end. Here's a template we'd appreciate receiving in that support ticket. Your Alma and Primo institution codes, which are often not identical. Domains for Classic Primo and Primo VE, and most important, the date you're requesting to be reserved for your go live. Once you receive confirmation via the case that the requested date has been confirmed and reserved, there is a task which is to be completed by the day of the switch. This is the Primo Deeplink redirect configuration table in Alma. This table controls the redirection of the rest of the URL that comes after the base URL, the domain. We see the domain in light blue, and in dark blue is the rest of the URL. As mentioned, the base URL redirect will be taken care of either by our cloud team or your IT services provider. There are 4 URL parameters that can be translated upon redirection of the base URL. 1, VID, which is the view code. 2, doc ID, which is the record ID. 3, tab, which is the code of the tab or slot in Primo VE. And 4, search scope, which is the code of the scope or search profile in Primo VE. I've highlighted these in red. Short permalinks are redirected based on the record ID. Here's how to populate this configuration table. You'll need a separate row for each combination of domain that will be used for Primo VE and view that is currently used for Classic Primo. Yes, I know this sounds confusing. The source base URL is the domain that will be used to access Primo VE without the HTTPS prefix. That's important. And the view code is the code of the Classic Primo front end. Each combination of these two values gets its own row and then table of mapping. The screenshot at the top left is it's a possible combination and will end up being a row in the Deeplink redirect configuration. The screenshot at the bottom right demonstrates what the configuration table will look like with multiple rows, one for each possible combination. So we're using, we have a CNAME and we have a custom domain. So for each one, we have a row for our current Classic Primo views, default view and the services page view, which we'll talk about soon. Go to Views list in Primo Backoffice to see the list of views and their codes. Back at the Primo Deeplink redirect configuration table in Alma, create a row for each of the views you wish to be redirected to Primo V. You'll want a row for your services page view. You probably won't need to redirect any test views or views no longer in use. So, for example, if I have a live view and a services page view, and I intend to use a custom domain in addition to the Primo V CNAME, I'll have to create 4 rows in the configuration table. As we said, one for each combination of Primo V base URL and Classic Primo view. Let's have a look at that in Alma. Okay, sorry for that slight delay. Configuration menu, Discovery, Other, Primo Deeplink Redirect Configuration. Okay, you'll find this table empty, and we're going to add a row. Let's add a row. Okay, let's say this is my CNAME, and this is the code of my default view. Save it. And let's say I have a services page view as well. Save. And once you have all rows, you go into each one of them and you'll add mapping, which we'll see in a moment. Once you've created all the necessary rows in the configuration table, edit each row and then add the relevant mapping for each. This is the mapping that will translate the 4 URL parameters I mentioned earlier, and we'll go over them together now. View code. Use the code with which you created this row. It is displayed in the header of the page. Here. Okay, so this is the code, and we'll take this code, add new mapping, view code. Watch out for empty characters, and then you'll add the view code of your Primo V view. Data source. Go to Primo Backoffice, local data, data sources, and add the source code of each data source to the mapping. For each code, define whether the source system is Alma or not. You'll have one Alma data source, and if you have any external data sources, all the rest will be not Alma. Data source mapping is necessary for the doc ID redirection, replacing a classic Primo record ID with matching Primo VE record ID. And finally, tabs and scopes. Most of the mapping will probably consist of these two parameters. Now, there are two ways to find the classic Primo parameter values and their parallel values in Primo V. The first way is by opening the Views wizard in Primo backoffice, together with View configuration and Search configuration in the Alma Discovery menu, and finding the codes and tabs and the codes for tabs and scopes used in Classic Primo and their parallel codes used for Primo V. The other way is to simply open a session of Classic Primo in a browsing session, in a browsing tab, and a session of Primo V in another browsing tab. For each possible combination of tab and scope, you'll run a search in Classic Primo and replicate it in Primo V. Then find the matching values of the tab and search scope parameters in both systems in the address bar. Each search will reveal 4 values: original tab code, target tab code, original search scope code, and target search scope code. You'll repeat this for all search options in Classic Primo until you've found all target parameter values for the parameter codes used in Classic Primo. I personally like to gather all source code values and their target code values and other input parameters on a Notepad++ page or an Excel spreadsheet, and then copy it all into Alma. But by all means, find the method that's most comfortable for you. Now, let me just show you that quickly. Okay, this is not available. Okay, so this is my Primo V. This would have been my my classic Primo. You see, it's got Primo Explorer. This one has Discovery. What you would do, say this was the classic Primo, you'd run a search, and then you'd go and you find the code of the tab and the code of the search scope. And then you'd run this exact search in the Primo V view, and you'd find the target codes for tab and search scope. And you'll use these to translate in the mapping translation in the Deeplink redirection table. If you have configured slots or search profiles in Primo V that do not have matching tabs or scopes in Classic Primo, you have nothing to worry about. If you have tabs or scopes in Classic Primo that you haven't configured matching slots or search profiles for in Primo V, translate the Classic Primo tab or scope to the most inclusive slot or search profile in Primo V. This is to have the best chances of Deeplink redirecting to Primo V without breaking. Needless to say, upon any uncertainty, simply post a question in the Salesforce case you submitted requesting a go live date. All the mapping work I just described is relevant only for live active Classic Primo views, which end users access directly and perform searches in. Your services page view does not fall into this category. It is most likely used only for third-party sites offering a link that will display relevant Alma institutional holdings wrapped in a Primo page interface. So for your services page view, all you have to do is create a row with the Primo V domain or domains and the services page view code, and then open it and add a single entry mapping the services page view code to your default Primo VE view code. As I mentioned in the past, there is no need for a separate Primo VE view for your services page. The default VE view, or any other view you desire, can act also as the services page. So this is what the services page mapping would look like. We'd have a single row view code, and this is my Primo VE view code, my default Primo VE view code, and that's it. That's all you need for your services page view. Next, one small thing to check, and this isn't at all related to the Deeplink redirection configuration. Take your Primo VE CNAME and paste only the domain in the address bar of your browser. It should automatically resolve at the default view. Do the same for your custom domain if you will be using one for Primo V. If a domain doesn't resolve to our Primo V view or doesn't resolve to the desired view, notify us with a comment in the Open Salesforce case. Just in case this isn't clear, you don't need to wait for the DNS switch to check this. Here's something you shouldn't forget, as you may be interested in taking further action. eShelf favorites are copied from user accounts in Classic Primo to their new accounts in Primo V. These are the saved records, not to be confused with saved searches, which are not copied over. Neither is the user's search history. I recommend notifying users of the need to log in and manually save their saved searches elsewhere prior to the switch over to VE. You can submit a request for a report of saved records to be extracted from the Primo database and sent to you. You can add a comment to the Salesforce case requesting this. This report will list all saved searches per user ID. All other details of the users are saved are anonymized for privacy reasons. Using Alma Analytics, you can upload the list of user IDs and retrieve a report of the users, including contact details. If any further assistance is required during this process, please contact Alma support or post a comment in the Open Salesforce case. So here we are at the go live day. Here's what's going to happen. We will implement a DNS switch, redirecting traffic from your Classic Primo CNAME to your Primo V CNAME. If you are using a custom domain and intend to continue using it for Primo V, then your domain administrator will have to point the domain at Primo VE CNAME instead of Classic Primo. If you've notified us in the Salesforce case of your intention to continue using your custom domain, our cloud team will add the SNI record on our end and any other preparation required for you to be able to point your custom domain at Primo V. Here we see that the base URL will change. If using the CNAME, Primo-Explorer will be replaced by Discovery. And if you've configured Deeplink redirection, the view code will be translated to the Primo V view code. If you are using an A record to access Classic Primo and do not have a unique domain, there will be no DNS switch, as I've explained earlier. In this case, the actual switch will be substituted with you updating the links and bookmarks you have on your library website leading to Primo. This includes any embedded search boxes and widgets you have leading to Primo. In order to prevent patrons from accessing the old Primo after go live, we suggest the following steps. 1, disabling silent login to Primo. 2, hiding all sign-in buttons on the Classic Primo page. And 3, modifying the sign-in banner message with text notifying users of the move to the new system. The message can be something like library search has moved to a new location. In order to get complete results and to request items, please go to myinstitution.primo.exlibrisgroup.com. It can take up to 4 hours for the DNS switch to propagate globally and on all networks. During this time, any given end user will either reach Classic Primo or be redirected to Primo V. There's no falling between the cracks and no downtime. Having said all that, it's most likely that you will experience the redirection within a few seconds. To see the outcome of the DNS switch almost immediately, try accessing Classic Primo on a device not connected to your institutional network. That could be your cellular network or private home ISP, which shouldn't be a problem for those of you working from home these days. I would just like to comment that, that this DNS switch does not have an expiry date. Once the DNS switch has kicked in, your Classic Primo frontend and back office will no longer be accessible using your CNAME or custom domain, as you will be automatically redirected to Primo V. Alternatively, you can access the frontend or back office using the A record. If your Classic Primo is on a dedicated direct environment and you do not have an A record, we can create a temporary one for you per request. Here are the additional stages of going live with Primo V. that we will be responsible for. Users' saved records will be copied over to user accounts in Primo V. This can take anywhere from a few minutes to several hours, depending on the number of saved records. This migration process is continuous, meaning you will gradually see more and more of your saved records until all have been processed. Primo Analytics historic data and stats will be copied over to Primo V Analytics, which is accessible from the Alma interface. This process usually takes only a few hours, but it can take up to 24 hours until you are able to see the data in your VE Analytics. Saved reports are not automatically copied over, but can be migrated per request. If you are using Primo APIs, the API routing will be updated to point at your Primo VE as opposed to the classic Primo. Primo VE will be enabled on your Alma sandbox. If you're using an Alma Premium sandbox, the next semi-annual sandbox refresh will leave your Primo V sandbox with a fresh copy of your Primo V production. Chat support will be enabled for Primo V if chat support is supported in your region. And of course, you'll be notified in the Salesforce case once all steps have been completed. Those were the actions that we will be responsible for on the go live day. Here are some tasks to be completed by you once you have successfully switched over to Primo V. If you are subscribed to Leganto or Campus M, you'll have to adjust the integration settings. For further assistance, please contact Leganto or Campus M support teams. You should update any third-party sites that offer links to your services page. The format of the services page, base URL, that you should provide them with is HTTPS, of course, the Primo domain /openurl /Alma institution code /Primo V view code with a question mark at the end. You don't have to memorize the format. It's noted in the documentation. This step is not urgent, as you will be backed up by the DNS redirection, but it is recommended not depending on the redirection in the long term. This base URL update includes modifying the Google Scholar publishing profile in Alma. Updating Primo links on your library website or anywhere else on the internet. This includes the domain and URL parameters of embedded Primo search boxes, which you may have on your library homepage. Relevant documentation can be found in clause number 7 of the Primo V customization best practices page in the documentation. For any further assistance, feel free to contact Primo support. Similar to the services page base URL update, modifying links and search boxes is not urgent, thanks to the DNS redirection. The final thing to do is go to the system status page and subscribe for updates regarding your Primo V environment. Your Alma and Primo V are on the same platform. So if, for example, you're on Alma AP01, subscribe for updates on Primo V AP01. After going live with Primo V, your classic Primo will remain active for at least 1 month, after which it will be disabled and eventually decommissioned. Please let us know if there's any need for us to keep your old Primo live for a few extra weeks. I'm going to pause here to address questions that have come in through the Q&A box. Scott, what do we have at the moment?
Yeah, Ben, we don't have any questions so far. So if you want to go to the pre-submitted questions, that'd be great.
Great. Okay, so I'll move on, and I'll give you another chance at the end if you can think of any questions. Okay, so here are some questions that we have been presented with in the past. We are part of a fulfillment network. Do all members of the network have to go live with Primo V at the same time? The answer is no. Each institution can switch to Primo V and they're at their own convenience. Fulfillment networks are an Alma setup, and the fulfillment relations between the members are not affected by the move to Primo V. Here's another question. We are a group of Primo institutions on the same multi-tenant environment. and we have configured search scopes containing records coming from other institutions. Do we all have to go live with Primo V together? Here as well, the answer is that the members of this group of Primo institutions don't have to switch to Primo VE at the same time. Institutions that you would like your Primo VE to continue searching their Alma repositories should have activated GoV by the time your institution is interested in switching over to Primo V. Now, if there's any problem with this, please contact us and we'll find a solution. One more question. We are a group of Primo institutions using a joint Alma institution. Do we all have to go live with Primo V simultaneously? Okay, so this is the multi-campus topology, and the answer is yes. These Primo institutions will go live together as because the switch to Primo V is on the Alma institution level, and they're all using the same Alma. Okay, Scott, do we have any more questions?
Nope, it's a quiet crowd today, so no questions.
Okay, so I'd like to thank you all for tuning into this GoVE webinar. I believe we've covered pretty much all there is for you to know about the final stage of your GoVE process. I hope I've been able to reflect how easy, simple, and safe it is to actually make that final step of going live. If you have any questions, any concerns, any comments regarding the go live, or any other stage of GoVE, please don't hesitate and contact us using this email address or by opening a case with Primo support. If you feel a need for an online meeting before going live or before making the decision to go live, we're more than happy to schedule one.